All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back for session number 7, I think. I think we're at number 7, week 7 of music theory. And this, if you're just joining us, is the 7th week, but stay with us. I say that all the time, but stay with us for this hour. You're probably going to pick up a few things. And at the end of the session, go back and watch the 6 previous weeks. We covered quite a bit, really, in 6 weeks, in 6 hours, really. And what we're trying to do here is to give you all the tools that will allow you to approach any music theory concept and be able to work on it on your own. Really, music theory is pretty easy if you have the tools. It just requires a few tools put together, and with these few tools put together, you can expand on your own and keep going. So that's what we've been doing. We've talked about intervals, which is the distance between two notes, and that's what allows us to measure anything in music and make sense of anything that we hear. And that was what we've been using for the 6 first weeks, really, intervals. We measured a lot of different things. We saw that there are 2 main boxes in music theory where we can place musical elements. There's the minor box and the major box. The box is determined by the third, which is an interval. And if everything I'm telling you right now doesn't make any sense, it's because you haven't been watching the first 6 sessions, which are recorded, by the way, so you can rewatch them. So those 2 main boxes for minor elements and major elements, and it's the third that determines if it's going to be in the minor box or the major box. We also started to talk about scales. We talked about the major scale, the minor scale. Last week we talked about modes also, and modes are just scales. And each of these modes can be placed in one of these boxes, major box, minor box. And today we're going to talk about pentatonic scales, which can sound for some of you a little unconventional to start with modes and then go to pentatonic scales. That's just the way I do it. So that's what we'll do today. But before we go into this lesson, we did get a question, and I want to cover that really quick. So it's a long text, but basically, if I understand this question correctly, actually, I'll read it. I'll read it for you. Maybe it'll help you get something out of this. So what is the relationship between the scale interval chart and the mode chart? So the scale interval chart that Chasing Wind is referring to here, I think, is the very first diagram that we talked about in session 1. And that was basically a shape that listed all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. And the mode chart that you're referring to, I think, has to do with last week's sessions where we studied different modes. So the first part of the question was, what is the relationship between the scale interval chart and the mode charts? I'm grasping the patterns and concepts, but little confused as to how, for example, the major scale interval shape 1 corresponds with the major Ionian mode chart. It matches with the root on the 6th string, but strings 3, 2, and 1 don't match any of the other shapes. Hopefully I'm expressing this clearly. Thanks. So I think I get what you're saying. And basically, you're referring to what I mentioned last week, where the shape that we used that listed all the major intervals and the perfect intervals, it's that shape that we memorized to determine all the other intervals. That shape corresponds to the Ionian mode, the major scale. It's the same exact thing. And if we take the root on the 6th string and we started playing that shape that we had, that lists all the major intervals and the perfect intervals, we have the root, the major 2nd, the major 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, major 6th, major 7th, and root. Those intervals correspond to the formula of a major scale. And the way that it's played here, it corresponds exactly to that first position of the Ionian mode. But then it gets a little out of whack because the shape doesn't correspond to the other shapes that we've learned. And that's just because when you're playing something, when you're playing a scale, we're trying to organize things so that the notes are reachable. And that's why you might not recognize the shapes or the patterns, but if you were to look at the notes are the same exact notes. And that's because you could play a note, the same exact note, on multiple areas of the fretboard, multiple strings. So that's why you might be a little confused, but they're one and the same. The shape that we started with in session 1 corresponds to the Ionian mode, the major scale. If that answer didn't answer what you were asking, just feel free to ask again. And you can also reach me personally if this requires a longer answer on JamPlay. There's a message thing somewhere where you can message me, and I'll be happy to answer that too. That being said, now that that's out of the way, we're going to talk about pentatonic scales today. A lot of players, whether they understand music theory or not, the first thing they learn after learning a few chords, when they get their electric guitar, for example, or when they wanted to get into improvisation, they learn the pentatonic scale. And the reason they do that is that we find pentatonic scales in a lot of different other scales. So first of all, what is a penta scale? Penta means 5. So a penta scale, a pentatonic scale, is a 5-note scale. And there's a lot of pentatonic scales that exist. You can make up your own pentatonic scales. As long as you have 5 notes, it's a pentatonic scale. Today we're going to cover 2 main pentatonic scales. One of them is major, so it's going to be in that major box that we mentioned earlier. One is minor, it's going in the minor box. And remember, I told you what determines the box is the third. So if we have a major third, it's going in the major box. It's a major musical element if it has a major third. If it has a minor third, it's going in the minor box. So we're going to talk about 2 very commonly used pentatonic scales. One of them has a major third, one of them has a minor third. And they have 5 notes. If not, there would not be a penta scale, pentatonic scale. And so back to the reason why most players learn a pentatonic scale, usually a little on the minor pentatonic scale. That sounds like this. And out of that pentatonic scale, there's all these bluesy licks that you can extract. And a lot of players have made a career with that scale, and that's very possible to do that. A successful and fulfilling musical career with just that one scale. And the reason why it's possible is that we find that, in this case, minor pentatonic scale and a lot of other more complex scales. A scale usually has 7 notes. A diatonic scale. Di means 7. And all the modes that we studied last session, in session number 6, they had 7 notes. And we saw that by studying the commonly used modes, scales, we saw that within the minor modes, there were 3 of them. If you remember last week, we talked about the Dorian mode, the Phrygian mode, and the Aeolian mode, also known as the natural minor scale. We saw that they had 5 notes in common. And those 5 notes, if we were to look at them closely, they spell out that minor pentatonic scale that I just played. 5 notes extracted from Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian correspond to that minor pentatonic scale. And that's why so many players just learn that minor pentatonic scale, and they sound good in multiple musical contexts. They sound good in Dorian, they sound good in Phrygian, and they sound good in Aeolian, because they're using the 5 notes that are common to these 3 modes. The problem, if you only rely on the minor pentatonic scale, is that if you play your solo and you take out the rhythm section, then there's no color. The only color that you have, your solo is going to sound the same all the time. You're not going to bring out the color of the Phrygian, Dorian, or Aeolian modes, because you're not playing the notes that are characteristic of these 3 minor modes. You're only playing the 5 notes that are common to Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian. Therefore, if you take out all the chords, your solo is going to sound minor pentatonic. And it's going to sound okay with the backing track, but not much color. Let me give you an example. I'm going to improvise just using an A minor pentatonic scale, which we'll cover the diagrams in a little bit, and you'll be able to also check the charts in the lesson. You can download them and study them. But I'm just going to improvise using a minor pentatonic scale, and then I will play a rhythm section in the back that corresponds to the Dorian. And then on the same exact solo that I played, I'm going to change the chords to make it sound like Phrygian, and then I'll change the chords again to make it sound like Aeolian, and you'll see that the color changes only because of the chords that I'm playing. But the solo in itself doesn't really bring out the color of that mode, because we're only playing with the 5 common notes to Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian. Again, if you're completely lost, you need to watch again the previous 6 sessions, and anything that I'm saying here has been covered in those previous sessions. So I'm gonna play something here, and I'm gonna loop it, and then over that I'll play some chords. So I'll start with just a tempo. I'm gonna give myself a click that I'm recording here, and I'm gonna loop that. Got a looper here. Do 4 more. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to loop that. So that's our click. On that, I'm just going to improvise using that A minor pentatonic scale. Okay, and then I'll loop that solo. 3, 4. Okay, so I've got a solo that was recorded using only the 5 notes of the minor pentatonic scale. That's how it sounds like. Doesn't really have much color to it. Now I'm going to play a chord progression, and I'm going to make this sound Dorian. It has a particular color, right? Now I'm going to change that color to Phrygian. It's still going to work. Different color. This is what I started with. As opposed to different color, same solo. I could play Aeolian, that would work too. Phrygian. Hopefully that makes sense, what I did. I played a solo, a standard solo, that didn't have much color because the solo is built only using 5 notes of the minor pentatonic scale that are common to Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian. So without the chords, you didn't really know which mode you are playing in. And so that's why. That is just to illustrate why a lot of players use that pentatonic scale, minor pentatonic scale, because it's useful in so many different contexts. And we're going to see later that we can do the same thing, or we saw last week that the same is true for the major pentatonic scale. Okay, if you have questions on this, at the end of the session, just like any other sessions like this, there's a time where we can ask questions, and I'll be happy to exchange like that. I will also pause at some point during this this session to let you ask questions. So feel free to put them on the chat, and we'll keep track, and I'll make sure to answer those. Okay, so we answered the question, why do people use pentatonic scales so much? Because they are very commonly used notes that are hidden in other more complex scales. And we also answered the question, what is a pentatonic scale? It's a 5-note scale, so 5 distinct intervals. One of these intervals is the root. That's the starting point. Any musical element needs to be measured according to something else, and that something else is called the root. A chord, a scale, a riff needs to be placed in relation to something else. So we know one of the notes of the pentatonic scale, it's the root. That root can change depending on the key. So if I'm in A, if I'm playing an A minor pentatonic, the root is A. All the other 4 notes are going to be measured to that A, to that root. If I'm in B minor pentatonic, the root is B. So the roots can change. And there's a third in there. We know that because that's what tells us that we can place these pentatonic scales in a major box or a minor box. So the minor pentatonic scale is going to have a minor third. The major pentatonic scale is going to have a major third. So those are the 2 things we know already. And we know that just by the name. If I tell you minor pentatonic scale, we know that it has a root, because any musical element needs a root. And we know it's a minor third. There's a third involved in there. A major pentatonic scale, a third is involved too, and that's a major third. So we know 2 of the notes of these 2 very important scales. So we're going to compare these 2. I'm going to show you a diagram here with these 2 positions. We're in the key of A, and I kept it in A so that we can compare them more easily. We could see the common notes, and then we can see where they differ. The red notes, that's a habit that I have, are red so that you can really see the reference notes. R stands for root, and it's from that root that we can measure the other notes. Notice that in the top diagram, for example, which is a major pentatonic scale, we have 3 red notes. Those red notes are the same exact notes. A root is a root. There's not multiple types of roots in a musical elements, because if that were the case, then what is the most important root out of all? There's just one root. But you see that there are 3 red dots, and that's because we, on the guitar, in order to organize our thoughts, we talk in terms of positions. A position is just a slice of the fretboard. So if you look at your fretboard, very hard to memorize all the possibilities on there, so we take slices of them. And the slices are determined by reachable areas. And usually a slice of the fretboard or a position is going to span across 4 frets, because that's kind of reachable, sometimes 5. But if you have more than that, we are combining several slices of the fretboard together. And that can be useful, right, to go to play faster ideas, that kind of thing, which is not very clean, but that kind of idea. But here we're talking about just standard positions. They're often called vertical positions, because when you look at your fretboard, it's in a vertical way, from the sky to the ground, or the ground to the sky, just vertical, as opposed to horizontal. Horizontal ways are usually used to play legato, faster ideas. But this is a vertical position, a vertical slice of the fretboard. And you see that back to those roots, there are 3 red notes there. If we're in A major pentatonic, those red notes are A's. So we have 1 A on the low E string, 5th fret. The next root that we have is on the 4th string, 7th fret. Now these 2 notes don't sound the same. One is higher than the other. But if I play both together at the same time, they kind of blend with each other because they're both A's. One is a low A, one is a higher A, but they have the same exact function. They're both roots. And then we have another one on the high E string, the 1st string, 5th fret. both A's too. So if I play these three A's together, they all kind of blend together. They have the same function. And the same is true for other intervals where we have some repetitions. Like the second, for example, we have 3 seconds if you look at your diagram there. So that's why. But really, there are only 5 types of notes. That's why it's a penta scale, pentatonic scale. And you can see that in the top diagram. It's a major pentatonic scale, therefore it's a major third, and you see that third there, the 3 is major. And you know that according to your diagram, the very, very first diagram that we learned in session 1 6 weeks ago, that listed all the major intervals and the perfect intervals, that third, 1, 2, 3, is major. It's built into the mother diagram that we learned in session 1 6 weeks ago. Okay, so that's for those 2 notes that we have, root and major third. If we look at the next shape, a minor pentatonic scale, we see again those 3 roots. The 3 roots are placed exactly as they are in the first diagram because we're in A, so those roots don't change. The third changes. We have a minor third. Sometimes it's written a B3, which is flat. B is for flat. So a flat third, minor third, same thing. And we know that it's a minor third because the name says a minor pentatonic. And that's what tells us it's a minor musical element. What are the similarities we have? We see that they have a perfect fifth. The top scale, the major pentatonic scale, and the minor pentatonic scale both have a perfect fifth. That's all. That's as far as the similarities. The only similar notes are between the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic are the root and the perfect fifth. So in essence, that means that if we had a chord with a root and a perfect fifth, and that's all we had, if we play these 2 together, root and fifth, that's called a power chord. You've seen those before, I'm sure. If I looped a power chord on my looper, I could play either of these scales because in music, you need to respect the elements. If a chord has a root and a fifth, you could play any scale that has a root and a fifth. Therefore, we could play these 2. So let's try it and see how they sound. Here's just a quick loop using a root and a fifth, and I'll record a little backing track like that. Very simple. I'll start with the major pentatonic scale over this chord. We'll see how it sounds. Now the minor one, they sound different, but they work. And the next one. They both sound very different, but they both work because I matched the elements together. So that's if you had to know one thing in music theory, that's the thing. You need to match musical elements. Respect the intervals that are given to you by the chord or the chords or the lick or the musical idea. You've got to respect the elements. So if a chord has a perfect fifth, your scale needs to have a perfect fifth. You don't have to play the perfect fifth. You don't have to play the fifth at all, but if you had to play a fifth at some point in your solo, it would have to respect the type of fifth that is given to you by the chord. If you have a chord with a minor seventh, that's your minor seventh. So a minor 7 chord, for example. If that's your chord, we've got a minor 7th. And you choose to play a major 7th, it clashes. The same can be said for, let's say that we have a chord with a major, or let's do a chord with a minor third. And you play a scale with a major third. It doesn't work, right? You're not matching the elements. If you had to play a third, it has to respect the type of third given to you by the chord. In this case, it's minor. That works. This, that clashes. So that's the one lesson you need to remember. In anything you do, you need to respect the elements. By the way, rules can be broken and are broken all the time, and that's called playing outside, and that's okay to do that. You just need to be aware that if you decide to not respect the elements given to you by the backing track or the band or the chord or whatever, that's going to clash, that's going to create tension, and that tension is going to create something uneasy for the listener. The listener is not going to be at ease. So you're taking the listener on a journey, on a musical journey. You're taking him on an uneasy place. You need to bring him back if you want a happy listener. If not, that's okay too. Just know that that's going to affect the listener's emotional attachment to the music that you're playing. You can end a musical piece with something dissonant, something uncomfortable. Just know it. Just be aware of it. Okay. And that's why most of the time in advertisement music, for example, or radio music, popular music, usually all the elements are matched together. It's very melodic, and things are going to be very comfortable. Some people could say that kind of music is little dumber than other types of music. That I don't think so. But I don't know where I'm going with this. Anyways, match the elements if you want to be, if you want to make people happy. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Okay, let's go back now to our diagrams, pentatonic scales. We're actually going to start with the second one, the minor pentatonic scale, because I think if you had to know one, that's the most useful one, because it's going to work. A lot of songs are minor songs that you're going to play with. And if you had to disrespect the elements, meaning if you had to play a minor third over a major third, or if you had to let me start this over, sorry. If you had to disrespect the elements, meaning if you had to play a type of interval that is not given by the chord, you would want to do it this way. You'd want to use a minor third over a major third and not the other way around. There are cultural reasons for that. The blues is full of that kind of stuff, and we're used to that sound. So we're going to start with that second one, and we're just going to memorize, first of all, the formula, which is the blueprint of that scale, and that's written right on top there. So again, we're on the A minor pentatonic scale. We have a root, a minor third, a fourth, a fifth, and a minor seventh. And if I just told you the formula without having the diagram, and if you follow the previous sessions, you should be able to come up with your own position. So let's try that. Obviously, you have the cheat sheet right there. That's the position we have. But if we didn't have that, we have a root, which is A, and we'll play a root on the low E string 5th fret. That's A. Then we have a minor third. So if you use your canvas that we learned in session 1, that canvas lists all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. So we want a third. So 1, 2, 3. That's a major third. You make it minor. And that minor third, if I follow the diagram from session 1, that minor third is on the 5th string, 3rd fret. But remember that you can play the same note on multiple areas of the fretboard. And that's what we're doing here. We're going to move that note on the 5th string, 3rd fret. We're going to move it on the 6th string, 8th fret. Same exact sound. And the reason we're doing that is to keep things in a reachable area of the fretboard, a reachable slice of the fretboard. Then we have a perfect fourth. That perfect fourth, you should be able to reach it right away if you followed session 1. That perfect fourth is built into the canvas that we used. Then we have a perfect fifth, the 5th string, 7th fret, and a minor 7th, which is on the 4th string, 5th fret. Those are the 5 notes of a minor pentatonic scale. Now this starts to draw an area of the fretboard, a slice of the fretboard between frets 5 and 8 basically. And I'm going to try to play anytime I have a root, anytime I have a minor third, a perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor 7th, anytime I have one of these notes, I'm going to put a dot on my fretboard and keep it to one slice of the fretboard right here. And that's what you have there, that full position. And notice that it has 2 notes per string, so that makes it easier. So from the low E string to the high E string, we have 2 notes on each strings, and these notes are frets 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7 again, 5, 7, 5, 8, and 5, 8. So yes, I'm playing more than 5 notes. I'm playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 notes. But these notes are just a repetition of 5 unique intervals. Root, minor third, fourth, fifth, minor 7th. So that's a slice of the fretboard that represents an A minor pentatonic scale. That slice starts with the first note of the minor pentatonic scale. So it's called the first slice. But slice doesn't sound very musical, so we're going to replace that with position. First position, first slice of the fretboard. That's what it is. The first position of a scale corresponds to a slice of the fretboard that starts with the first note of that scale. The second position of any scale, whether it's pentatonic or diatonic or whatever, the second position corresponds to the slice of the fretboard that starts with the second note of the musical elements we're covering. Therefore, because each position, each slice corresponds to one of the notes of the scale that we're studying, we have as many slices or as many positions as there are notes in the scale that we're studying. Okay, so I'll say it again one more time. There are as many positions as there are notes in a scale. So if we're studying a penta scale, a 5-note scale, how many positions do we have? 5, right? 5 slices of the fretboard. It comes down to basically taking a minor pentatonic scale, in this case, an A minor pentatonic scale. So A is a root. And from that A, we're going to stack minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor 7th. Did I miss one? Root, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor 7th. We've got a fretboard, and anytime we have one of these 5 notes, I'm going to put a dot. We'll have a lot of dots. And now instead of memorizing this big fretboard, I take slices. Each of the slices starts with one of the 5 notes of that pentatonic scale. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to take a look at those. So the diagrams I included, you can download them. For the sake of space here, we don't have all 5 listed, but you can see that position 1 starts with the first note of the pentatonic scale. That's what we just memorized, right? A minor pentatonic starts with the first note, which is the root. And that's one slice of the fretboard. The second position starts with the second note of the minor pentatonic scale. And if you remember your formula, root, minor third is that second note, therefore the second position starts with the minor third. And you see that on position 2. Flat third, minor third, that's the starting note. And we have that flat third on the low E string 8th fret. And again, we're going to take a similar slice of the fretboard, similar in width, and we're going to have 2 notes per string. That's going to facilitate our slicing in the fretboard. It's going to make it automatically reachable like that. And that's what we have. If you look at position 2, we have the same exact notes that we had in position 1, but they just start with the second note, which is a flat third. And if we memorize that, we are starting on the low E string, again, 2 notes per string. We'll have frets 8, 10, followed by 7, 10, 7, 10, 7, 9, 8, 10, and 8, 10. Now, if I were to play a solo over, let's do a minor chord, very simple minor chord with the root, minor third, perfect fifth. I'll play that chord. I could play position 1. I could also play position 2. Those two scales or two positions are the same exact scale. There's not one that is better than the other, or there's not one that's going to bring out a better color than the other, because I'm playing the same exact intervals, just in a different slice of the fretboard. And the reason why you would memorize different positions, eventually all the positions, there are multiple reasons. One of them is because you're going to be able to reach higher notes. Now, the same intervals, but played higher on the fretboard. And sometimes, if, let's say, there's a lot of stuff going on in the bass zone, like there's the bass player, and then you've got some chords that are kind of in that range. You want to try to differentiate yourself from whatever other people are playing, and for that you might want to play in a higher area of the fretboard instead of just hanging out in that zone. And that's why positions are going to help you stand out a little bit more, because you might play in a different range of the instrument. That's one reason why it's important to know all your positions. But another position is due to the fact that as guitar players, no matter how hard we try, we tend to gravitate our musical ideas towards comfort zones. And oftentimes, and this happens to anyone, our music is directed by the licks we've learned or the comfort zones that we've acquired. And I'm sure most of you, we're all guilty of this. If I say, all right, let's play something in A minor. 1, 2, 3, go. What are you going to do? Probably that kind of thing, right? You're going to be in this area of the fretboard because you probably spent most of your time memorizing position 1. It's an easy position to acquire. It starts with the first note. And therefore, all your licks, all your musical ideas are in that area of the fretboard. The problem with that is that you're going to gravitate towards the same bends all the time. You're most of the time going to bend that 4th to sound like the 5th, or maybe the minor 7th to sound like the root. We've all heard those licks, right? And that's limiting for your musical expression. Whereas if you force yourself to play in all 5 positions of a minor pentatonic scale, for example, that's going to break your comfort zones, and that's going to force you to rely more on your inside ear, your inside musical persona, and really dig deep to find the musical ideas and then let it flow out of your fingers no matter where you're at, as opposed to letting your fingers do the talking. Yeah, I know it's JamPlay's motto. I think the t-shirt said let your fingers do the talking, which is good, but we're trying to avoid that here. Okay, so that's why it's important to know your positions. Let's go back to the chart with those positions, and then we'll take a break soon to see if there's any questions. If you look at position 3, Position 3 starts with the third note of the minor pentatonic scale. And the third note, according to the formula, is root, minor third, perfect fourth. Should start at the perfect fourth, and it does. And that perfect fourth on the low E string happens to be on the 10th fret if we're in A. Again, 2 notes per string to make it reachable and a nice, comfortable slice. So from the low E string to the high E string, we have frets 10, 12, 10, 12 again, 10, 12, 9, 12, 10, 13, and 10, 12. So we've got 3 positions in a row. Position 1, 2, and 3. Notice that if I took position 2 and drag and dropped that position on top of the diagram of position 1, you see that those 2 positions, one after the other, will cover a wider area of the fretboard. So position 1 is right here. Position 2 is here. If I pasted position 2 on top of position 1, you will see that there's some notes in common. The right side note of position 1, if you look at your diagram, you've got a left note, a right note, left, right, left, right. All the right side notes, from the low E string to the high E string for position 1, that would be minor third, perfect fifth, root, perfect fourth, minor seventh, minor third, corresponds to the left side notes of position 2, which is minor third, perfect fifth, root, fourth, minor seventh, and minor third. You see that? So they all kind of blended to each other. So, in other words, any note of any position can be played in 2 positions. So if I look at position number 1, let's say the perfect fifth, that's on the 5th string, 7th fret. That perfect fifth on the 5th string, 7th fret could be part of position 1, or also part of position 2. You see that? So they all kind of blend into each other. So really quick, I want to give you a tip as to how you can memorize these positions. Each of these positions have the red notes in there, the roots, right? And what I want you to do is always be aware of where the root is, or at least one of these roots. That's going to be your reference point. So for position 1, it's easy. The root is the very first note of your position. For an A, that's the first note you're starting with on the 5th string. Position 2, the root is on the 4th string and 7th fret if you're in A. That might be a little uncomfortable to memorize roots on the 4th string, because we're good at memorizing roots on the low E string or the 5th, but then 4th, it's a little outside of comfort zone. Just see it as an attachment to position 1. It's just on the right side of position 1. Position 3 uses its root on the 5th string. So if we're in A, for example, you find an A on the 5th string. We have one on the 12th fret. And that position happens on the left side of that root. So just, determine where the root is and see if the position happens on the left side or the right side of that root to build your position. We're going to look at the 2 last ones, the 2 last positions. So we have positions 4 and 5. Position 4 has its root on the 5th string and happens on the right side. So if we're in A, we've got an A on the 12th fret. We're not starting with the root. We're starting with the 4th note of the minor pentatonic scale, which is the 5th. But that's okay. When you're playing, you don't have to start with the root all the time. It doesn't matter. The root's given by the chord. but that's just your visual reference point. And then position 5, you see that it's all the way low on the fretboard. I didn't have to put it there. I could place it all the way up on the fretboard, but the reason I placed it lower is that position 1 has its root on the low E string, 5th fret, happens on the right side of that root. Position 5 has the root on the low E string again, but happens on the left side. And I wanted to show you that position 5 and 1 are very close to each other. One happens on the right side, one happens on the left side. So that's how I want you to approach them. Memorize them one after the other. Start with the minor ones. And once you have a couple of these positions memorized, when you know where the root is, find a backing track. Go on the Jam track page on JamPlay, and you'll find a bunch of backing tracks. You can select your key, find A minor, and then play using these positions that you've learned. Spend time on each position, and not just going up and down, which is important, but once you have that, start to ask yourself the question, what could I say with that position musically? And start making words, sentences, and conveying musical ideas using these musical alphabets like that. And the approach is the same exact one for the major pentatonic scale. Same exact thing. The formula is different. Let's just take a look at that formula. Then we'll take some questions. So if we could go back to the chart with the 2 positions. Great. So the top one, we'll look at the formula. We've got root, major 2nd, major 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, and major 6th. If you remember the very first session, that blueprint that we had, the very first shape that we learned, lists all the major intervals and the perfect ones, and the major pentatonic happens to have only major intervals or perfect ones. So it should be a very easy shape to memorize. And we'll take a look at position 1 here. We're in A again. So 6th string, 5th fret for the root. Again, 2 notes per fret. It's going to make it a nice, simple slice. We've got from the low E string to the high E string, we have frets 5, 7, 4, 7, 4, 7, 4, 6, 5, 7, and 5, 7. And that'll work over any chord that is built on these intervals. You need to match the elements. If an interval is not given, in this case, there were no 7s in that major pentatonic scale. We only had a root, major 2nd, major 3rd, perfect 5th, major 6th. There's no 7. That means that you could choose and pick the type of 7th that you want to use in a chord. So we could build a chord with a root, major 3rd, major 7th. That would work. Let's try that. I need to delete that previous one, sorry. And okay. So I'm going to record a chord with a root, major 3rd, and major 7th. Over that, I could play a major pentatonic scale because I'm respecting the elements. I could also play the same exact scale over a chord that has a root, major 3rd, minor 7th, because the 7th is not given by the pentatonic scale, therefore I get to pick what kind of 7th. Let's try that this time. So I'm going to record the same thing with a root, major 3rd, minor 7th. What am I doing? That's what I'm doing. I could play a major pentatonic scale. That works too, right? Matching the musical elements is what matters in music theory. Okay, so I talked a lot, and now we're going to open it up to questions. Hopefully we have some, and let's start with question number 1.
Okay, from Edge EM. So David, if the chord I am soloing to has a flat third or a flat seventh, I can include major third and seventh in my solo, but should not the other way around.
Okay, so yeah, this refers to breaking the rules, right? And if you had to break the rules, you would do it the blues way, which is on a major chord. So it's the other way around. If you're soloing over a chord that has a root, major third, minor seventh, for example. Let's try that. Okay, so right here we have a root, major third, minor seventh. The rules would say that I'm going to pick a scale that has a major third, right? So major pentatonic. That works perfectly at matching the elements. The blues is a little weird in that there's a rule that's broken all the time. When you have a major chord, you can't play a minor third. That works too, right? But if I stopped on that third for a while, you'll see that it really does clash. It clashes, but we're so used to that sound. That it almost works. But you also notice that if you listen really carefully to blues players, they kind of tend to bend that minor third a little bit to suggest the right note. But don't get too caught up on that. That's breaking the rules. And for now, to really understand music theory, I don't want you to break the rules. And that's also why a lot of players who have been playing blues for years and years and years have problems coming to music theory, because their whole music system is kind of based on a theory mistake, playing that minor third over a major third. I get a lot of students, great guitar players who just don't understand playing with modes and music theory, because their whole music system is based on that. And that's why it's very hard for bluesmen, for blues people to understand music theory in that way, because they hear it differently. Nothing against blues players at all. I love the blues, but anyways, I hope that answered your question.
Okay, here's one from fretboard 23. How do you mix and match pentatonics, like E minor penna over A minor chords?
So that's a good question. That could be approached in a lot of different ways. It depends what you mean by how. If it's a technical thing or a musical thing, but in essence, and I'll have. I think you were there last week, but if not, just watch last week again. But basically, if we looked at the minor modes, for example, the frequently used minor modes, and if my answer doesn't make sense to those of you who are watching, don't worry about it. I'm going to go a little bit deeper here. We know that Aeolian, Dorian, and Phrygian include a minor pentatonic scale. Those are the 5 notes that are common to Aeolian, Phrygian, and Dorian, the 5 notes of the minor pentatonic scale. Fretboard 23, I don't know how advanced you are, but I'll just assume that you understand the order of appearance of the modes. There's a particular order that these modes appear in. And oftentimes I don't like to talk about it too much for players who don't know modes, because then they only take this shortcut and never really dive into what makes a mode. But I'll just assume that you know that they all have an order: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, and so forth. Well, by blending the knowledge of the order, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, with the knowledge that Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian could be replaced with the minor pentatonic scale, we could say that now we have 3 minor pentatonic scale positions that are offered to us over any given minor mode. So if we are, for example, playing an A Dorian, I could play my full A Dorian mode, which I could replace with a minor pentatonic scale. I could use the order Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, so I could play now the B Phrygian over my A Dorian. I could also replace my B Phrygian with the B minor pentatonic. That's pentatonic number 2. I've got A minor pentatonic now. I've got B minor pentatonic. And now I need to find the pentatonic that relates to the Aeolian. So I've got Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian. That's E. So I could also play E Aeolian that I could replace with E minor pentatonic. All that played over A Dorian. And that's how you can blend them. Let's just illustrate it really quick. Here's an A Dorian backing track. Over that I could play A Dorian or A minor pentatonic. I could play B minor pentatonic for B Phrygian. And E minor pentatonic. So that's 3 pentatonic positions that I could blend together to have a Dorian sound. Okay, I went somewhere that I didn't plan on going, so I hope the answer made sense. If not, I highly recommend that you check out a series that I recorded a few years back on applied music theory, where I go a little bit more in depth, and it's all somewhere on the JamPlay courses. So check that out. I go more in depth on that, but hope that helped.
Okay, from I Fits Rockin'. Notice the second position of the minor scale is the major shape. Is the second or third, etc., position of the major pentascale the same shape as position 1 of the minor scale?
Yeah, very good observation. Yes. So you will find that there are some, I was going to say similarities. It's more than similarities. Exactness in some of the positions. And I didn't want to mention that because that's something I want you to discover on your own, which you just did. And also, I don't want you I don't want your mind to go in a place where it's just going to take that shortcut by, well, since there's some similarities, I could just learn one of the sets of 5 positions for the minor pentatonic, and then do the math in my head to do the relative major ones. If you do that, and a lot of players do that, it takes a few seconds of their brain to do that conversion. So that might seem like that's nothing, a few seconds, but they do it all the time. All that because some players didn't want to spend time really thinking this is position 1 of the major pentatonic. This is position 1 of the minor pentatonic. Do the work like that. Yes, there are similarities. That's going to help your fingers, but don't do that shortcut because in the end, it seems like it's a shortcut, but it's not because you're thinking about that conversion each time you're playing, and in the end, it's not a shortcut. But yeah, great observation, and that could help in some ways. Yeah.
Okay. We had to tweak this question a little bit, so hopefully I got it right for you, Jackleg 20. In A minor, could you use the relative major, which would be C? If so, how would it sound?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question too. That's exactly what happened with those pentatonic scales, where the shapes are the same, and that's because they're relative positions. In other words, an A minor scale shares the same exact notes as a C major scale. Yet they're very different scales because what makes a scale is the intervals. And we are measuring intervals from different notes now, from A or C. And that's another reason why I don't want you to take the shortcut, because that doesn't help in really hearing those modes. So how would it sound if we are playing something in C major, for example? And I played an A minor. Now I play C major. It gives you the same exact feel, right? The only difference is the note I'm starting from. But it's not the note you start from that determines the key. It's the relationship between the notes you're playing and the backing track. The backing track in this case, which was a C, all the notes we were playing were attracted to that. That strong C. So it would sound the same, really. You'd still be playing in whatever the chord is in the back.
Okay. Bob Breed asks, the first position pattern is different for the major scale from the first position pattern for a minor scale?
Yeah, they're different because the intervals are different. Therefore, the positions are different. And the position numbers, again, correspond to which note of the scale you're starting from. If you're starting with the first note of the scale, which is the root, that's position 1. And because the minor pentatonic scale and the major pentatonic scale have different formulas, then the intervals are going to change. Therefore, the positions and the patterns are going to change. So, yeah.
Okay. Here's a technique question from Spot MFD. When playing the pentatonic or any mode in blues music, should you use 3 fingers for better bending?
Yeah, you can. I don't know if it's a should type of thing. It depends, but whatever is easier for you. For me, I do use 3 fingers usually, especially if I bend a right side note. So remember these positions, the pentatonic scales can be seen as there's always a far left note when you're looking at a fretboard and a far right note. Usually we bend the far right notes, the right side notes. And that means that the ring finger, or the pinky sometimes, but usually the ring finger is going to do the bend. And because the ring is doing the bend, that means that the middle and the index are available to add more strength. Especially with a thumb wrapped around, it's easier to bend that way. But remember that you can also bend the left notes, and that's going to bring out different types of intervals. And if you do that, that's going to have to be done with the index. And in that case, you really don't have anything to add to the strength of the index. So get used to that too. But yes, you can use 3 fingers, but I would get used to bending the other notes, or the other fingers, like just the index for the left note. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, 3 fingers is good. You'll have more strength.
Okay, from Dead Cell 34, how would you use these scale patterns to implement arpeggios?
So if we're talking about strictly minor pentatonic setting, the arpeggio thing is a little tricky because we're only dealing with 5 notes here, and arpeggios require really 7 notes in order to bring out these arpeggios and from any note of the scale. But to answer your question, how would you use it? How would you implement it with that? For the minor pentatonic scale, it's fairly easy because the minor pentatonic scale, root, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor seventh, 5 of these notes represent already a very standard, typical 4-note arpeggio. An arpeggio can be anything you want, but usually arpeggios are taking a note, the root for example, skipping the next and playing the next, skipping one and playing one, skipping one, playing one. In a 7-note scale, it's easy. So if you have a major scale, you play a note, skip the next, skip one, play one, skip one, play, skip, play, skip. And you'll have a very nice arpeggio. With the pentatonic scale, it's a little different because there's some notes missing. But the minor pentatonic scale is good because we play a note, skip the second to the third, skip the fourth to the fifth, which is built in, skip the sixth to the seventh, which is built in. But the major pentatonic scale, that's where it's problematic because we're playing the root, skipping the second to the third, skipping the fourth to the fifth, skipping the sixth to the seventh, but there's no seventh in there. And so that's where it gets a little trickier. You can't really know which seventh to use unless you look at the chords. So I think we'll get more into that kind of thing in the next course, which I wanted to tell you about too. It starts next week, and that's about playing melodic and building the perfect solo. We'll dive more into that in the next course, but yeah.
Okay. We have one more for the moment.
Okay.
From Bobby D. What are the best tension scale degrees that can be emphasized more?
So I'm not sure what you mean by tension scale degrees.
I think scale degrees that add tension.
Okay, yeah. It depends. It really depends on what feels tensed to you. But I would say, generally speaking, so the scale degrees that create tension would probably be low Korean, that creates tension, Phrygian. Yeah, those are the two I think that do create tension because they have minor seconds. Minor second is very tensed. It's so close to the root. If I play a root and a minor second at the same time, it's a cluster of notes. They're very close. And it's hard for the human ear to distinguish things that are so close, and that creates tension. So the Phrygian and the Locrian have those characteristics. But usually when you really want to create tension, we would use a different type of set of scales, like symmetrical scales, diminished scales, or symmetrical scales like the whole tone scale, those kind of things. So you would add tension by borrowing different types of scales or making up your own scales, usually. But that's another good question too. Great questions, and I'm glad you were here for this session. Remember that you can rewatch all the previous ones, and we have one more next week, and we're going to cover something, kind of bring back everything that we've talked about next week. So that's same time, same day. And next week, next Tuesday, we're starting a new session every Tuesday this time, and that's on melodic playing. So I hope you can join us for that too. If not, remember that as members, you can access all the previous streams and download the charts and use all the resources that are on JamPlay for you. And practice well. I think that's all for tonight. Have a great evening, everyone, and I'll see you next week.